Hello, everybody. Welcome to our second installation of 5 in our Butterfly in discussion. Today we have Yuki Izumihara, and I'm going to let Kevin do a lot of introduction too, because they've been working together on her presentation for today. I'll go over just a little bit of housekeeping again. The Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen is used for exactly that, questions, and I will funnel them to our hosts and have them answer. Any other kinds of observations or feelings or yeah, go for it, need to be in the chat. And of course, everybody can see that. Other than that, we will start the Q&A no later than 5 p.m. If Yuki is finished before then, we will start, and I will alert everybody that it is time to begin sending your questions. Please do not be shy. Please do not be afraid. Please do ask the questions. And with that, Kevin, I would like you to take it away.
Okay.
Kevin Suzuki.
Good afternoon, good evening, anybody who is tuning in from different time zones. My name is Kevin Suzuki, and I'd like to welcome everyone to week 2, San Diego Opera's panels discussing Madame Butterfly and the cultural issues surrounding the productions of Puccini's monumental work. Today's topic is Asian doll and hyper-sexualization, representation, intention, and effect, designing the tragic Oriental heroine. Today's panelist who will be speaking in a bit is Yuki Izumihara. Before I introduce her, I'd just like to take a moment to introduce myself as well. My name is Kevin Suzuki, and I'll be the moderator for today's panel, and I'll be with you through all 5 weeks. I am a dancer, choreographer, and the director of the Japanese Folk Dance Institute of New York, where we perform, preserve, and teach Japanese folk dance traditions which span over 1,000 years. In addition to my work as a dancer and choreographer, I also have served as a cultural movement advisor to many productions of Madame Butterfly, as well as providing workshops and one-on-one training. I've worked with Portland Opera, Atlanta Opera, Dallas Opera, Sarasota Opera, a lot of different opera companies in that capacity. And because of my experience with Japanese folk dance and Japanese culture, and as well as who I am, I'm half Japanese, half Irish. These are issues I care about deeply, and so I've kind of made it part of my work as well. So that's me and today's panelist, the important stuff. Today's panelist, who is Yuki Izumihara. Yuki Izumihara is a scenic, projection, and production designer born in Shimonoseki City, Japan, and based in Oakland, California. Ms. Izumihara's work is influenced by years of martial arts training and is animated by a belief in discipline, ethics, and craftsmanship. As an artist, graphic designer, and animator, with an emphasis on spatial composition and color narrative, Yuki aims to clarify, establish, and amplify project identities through visual language, including company season branding and pitching of various new projects in developmental stages. Her work has been seen at LA Opera, New World Symphony, San Francisco Symphony, Boston Lyric Opera, among others. And she's also worked at San Diego Opera, where she was the scenic and projection designer for the 2016 production of Tragedy of Carmen. Her work has been seen in theaters all across the world. She is currently right now a production designer for Opera Philadelphia's upcoming production of Madame Butterfly, which features visual concepts created by Ms. Izumihara. So before I pass things on to Ms. Izumihara, as Melody said, we have a Q&A portion at the end of her talk. So please write down any questions you might have as she is speaking, or start writing them in the Q&A prompt in Zoom. I personally, if I have a thought, it flies away very quickly. So please write it down. We'll put it in the Q&A as we are speaking, just so when the Q&A section comes, we can just start rolling with questions and getting Ms. Izumihara to really tell us all that she can today. So, without further ado, let's pass it over to Ms. Izumihara, and she can lead us in today's discussion.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for the introduction, and thank you for having me. my first actually right after school my first regional opera gig was in San Diego Opera. So yeah, lots of feeling. And then also I actually went to community college. I went to Palomar College and then also UCSD Extension to study English before I went to community college and then before I transferred. So um yeah, San Diego is always my home as well. Always a place I want to go back. So yeah, thank you for remotely now, but having me. Um, I wanted to touch a little bit on actually the first panel that was done by Alice and Helen. Uh it was a beautiful panel, so informative. And then I actually learned a lot for them. And then also I love how they constructed the panel from how sort of we as a group in general are seen, and then how as individual artists, like we try to sort of improve upon sort of group visibility. I think that was quite empowering presentation. And yeah, I think I loved the actions, all the actionable items they recommended, taught us, shared with us as artists what they're doing with Girls of Yellow Diamonds, and then Wear Yellow Proudly. Um, I think that's where the my presentation also is going to talk about when it comes to these story or touching on difficult subject. I would like to turn into a empowering story, because just the issue on its own does sort of pigeonhole us into negative feelings. Yeah. Um, so and then I think yeah, that even amongst Asians, that what stuck on me the most actually from their presentation is that diverse narrative part. Um, because even amongst Asians, I think there are different perspectives, which actually one thing that I will sort of share is that, like, for example, one of the in the graph that they shared of I don't know whether not all of you might have been in the previous panel. So briefly to explain, Alice and Helen has shared a sort of a grid or graph for us to sort of assess how project is more authentic for individuals. And then it was kind of arranged in that character versus character, and then inner voice versus the outer voice. So inner voice character rather than outer voice character will be a lot more relevant, and then it feels what's authentic for us. And then it was actually interesting to see actually where they put Mulan and Madame Butterfly. Alice and Helen has actually put Mulan to character and then outer, and then Madame Butterfly to the character and then outer voice. And then for me, actually, because I'm Japanese, and then I grew up actually not knowing Mulan's original story. So it was actually flipped. Um, I felt, for me, portrayal of Madame Butterfly feels a lot more character to me, because I'm seeing it as expecting to be Japanese, and then it's not. I think that's what happens with the story of Mulan too. Um, for me, because yes, I am Asian, but I didn't know the original story, so I'm just taking it in. That's Disney version was the way I was learning. So, I was like, oh, at least they're actually in a character is empowering. So how they portrayed, I saw less, because I think that when it's something about your home or something about what the icon that you grow up with, um, when there's differences, I think we all are, of course, like we see more of that difference. So I think that's kind of where even amongst the Asians, there is a diversity within. So again, I think talking about, as we talk about Madame Butterfly, like, yes, I am a Japanese woman, but it's just one of the opinions of many. I think we all, as Asian people, even amongst the Asian people, we have different opinion about this opera. So I want to quote Helen actually for saying that we are not the arbiter of the right. I think, yeah, I hope this panel is kind of just a reference for you all so that you hear diverse opinions, point of views. So yeah, that was something that, yeah, it was great to hear. I just wanted to also comment on it as well, because I think that horizontal connection towards each panel is actually very important. And also, I'm a huge fan of both of them as singers. When we were in Hawaii, actually, I got to film them, and then they were singing, both of them were singing right in front of me. That actually there was a duet that was from American Dream by Jack Perla that like I almost cried as I was filming because it was so beautiful. So huge shout out to both of them that gave a beautiful panel. And sort of switching over to now how I sort of saw Madame Butterfly, and then how I was asked, when I was asked to now do Madame Butterfly, what approach I took. My first production that I saw in person was 2019 in Opera Omaha. It's Jun Kaneko's, the famous Jun Kaneko's Madame Butterfly. He's a ceramic artist that builds actually giant sculpture. He has a very specific it's very Jun. Everything Jun does is very Jun. Amazingly beautiful. And then I was there on a different show, and then I happened to be there at the same time. And then I got to be the panelist actually to talk about cultural appropriation. And I think even then, even though it was done by design, it was designed by a Japanese person. Opera did feel a little bit foreign to me. Not necessarily little, it was actually quite a bit foreign to me. I think I did see Japanese hills in a sense of feeling of the Japanese film hills scenery wise, but it was hard to me to let go of my eyes from the super title screen. I think what was said definitely did, again, going back to that, I don't think this is Japanese. Like this is because I grew up and then it's felt caricature to me because I don't know actually any of the Japanese, not just Madame Butterfly, but other female or even male that acts particularly that way. So in that way, my point of view of Madame Butterfly was that within, to visualize it within that grid, it was the outsider perspective, and it was character. It was character. So what I tried to do when I was asked to do this production was that trying to make it quote unquote authentic or put in authenticity by putting more Japanese authenticity and or sort of Japanese visuals. I wanted to acknowledge that I'm treating this production as outside character, and I wanted to bring in or people like me who feels Madame Butterfly that way inside character. So on that note, I'm gonna share what I proposed to Upper Philadelphia. I'm gonna share if you can see. And then also, I'm a little bit more amongst the Asian sort of artists. I am more towards sort of hesitant about continuing Butterfly as the main canonical work. Um, uh, I think we can also get into like sort of after this what I hope to see more, but that is actually part of what I'm trying to discuss in here. So in Japan, just before we go into my full concept, just a cultural background is that in Japan, doll has spirit. I think that on its own idea isn't foreign. I think Helen and Alice brought up about Barbie. I think the movie Barbie was kind of that way, Toy Story. So that is a cultural belief. And then if the doll will have a spirit, so that's part of the reason why we don't throw away dolls. The doll becomes the vessel of our desire, whether that's a desire that is healthy for us or unhealthy for us. And then in Japan, usually that doll starts to take sort of a sense of their own. And then it start to think on their own. So it becomes our friend. Idea itself, again, is not foreign in, like, I think other culture. That imaginary friend, I think is the same idea, right? That imaginary friend starts to have its own identity. And so when we treat dolls, we don't throw away the dolls. There's a ceremony to give a proper goodbye. And it shows the festival itself is called Appreciation Festival. And it is saying thank you to the doll for sharing its time. And then it is actually a celebration for all of us that like we graduated from this doll. So that's the cultural background that I'm putting this in. So that's where my perspective is coming in as I'm seeing Madame Butterfly. For me, Chojo-san, and then I think Asian female is portrayed as doll-like. And what I felt was when I watched Madame Butterfly, I would just go ahead and read it actually. Unrooted perhaps best describes how Madame Butterfly lands with me. It's hard to say whether a story like Butterfly ever happened in the history of Japan. But for an entire industry to continue to celebrate this tale told millions of time as representative of Japanese womanhood is dismissive of all women who made and continue to make the harder choice to survive. It's difficult for me and feels wrong to connect women in Japan now with Chojo-san, a character engineered as an exotic tragedy. Puccini trapped Butterfly in a beautiful score. In turn, Butterfly has become a trap. AAPI performers are asked to lend it authenticity and life in new production that promise much but change little. To liberate ourselves from Puccini's beautiful trap, I propose accepting Chojo-san as the puppet he created and rendering her such on stage. Through this form, our production will become a cautionary tale examining how ongoing misrepresentation in content and character portrayal affects us all and take over. Unless and until we put our emphasis on future, positivity and empowerment. I hope through this production, I just caught something grammatically incorrect. I hope through this production, we can stimulate conversation towards forward-looking productions. And so that was that was what I actually presented. And then in terms of the concept, again, that idea of the spirit that I have, which was a method for me to bring in a contemporary Japanese character / person. That will be the opposite side, like in that, again, that graph. I have a pre-show where we are establishing that the doll, so my butterfly is a puppet. And then the singer, and then I actually have a puppeteer and singer operating the puppet. But I do establish this as first when Pinkerton sighs because the doll is so beautiful, the spirit of Chocho-san appearing. So what I did was I made a form where both voices can actually coexist. So in this production, I am portraying three worlds, which is the traditional world, the trope world, and then the reality, which traditional is sort of how American characters are portrayed, because I do think in the opera itself, for example, somebody like Sharpless has the most sort of range in emotion, I would say. So I think that's sort of I'm considering that's more normal. And then that trope / character are how the Japanese people are being portrayed. And the reality is that spirit, the person I'm actually bringing in. And part of the reason I'm actually talking about this is that I think also this is a question where Kevin almost asked during the last panel, is that how this type of a representation affects us. Yes, Madame Butterfly is the show that brings Asian artists on the main stage. It is a lot of people, a lot of Asian artists are actually known because of Butterfly, because there is a situation we are not cast in other role. So we are kind of having this unhealthy relationship with this opera. And whether doing this opera, it's a question of whether it's helpful or harmful, and it's hard to determine, like just as an artist, whether we are ready to say completely we should never do Butterfly. This is where I think I wanted to be a more ritualistic, more nuanced conversation. But at the same time, I did want to be honest about my feelings in a way of I don't think this is a helpful opera for Asian community. Like, if this is a way to present Asian people in the opera, I don't think this is a healthy way. I'm saying this also because of younger artists. And so in how that translates actually in this opera is that once we live in a world where where we live in a world where all the representation that we see is something that feels kind of a deformed version of us, or sort of either hypersexualized or overly submissive. Once when we keep seeing those as the main way to see us, I don't think it's helpful. And then in this production, I have the spirit actually stabbing the doll and then leaving her leaving the stage with the child, because I think it's one thing to take it in that, yes, this is what we have. So let's go with it. But I think it's another thing to sort of push forward the conversation so that we have a better way to talk about representation. And I'm spending the interlude to actually essentially have a dialogue with the audience, hoping to show the inspiring Japanese American, Japanese or Asian American icons that we should be showing and we should be talking about. It's interesting to see, like, a lot of in the opera, a lot of the story that is told was pretty much mainly Madame Butterfly. Yes, turned out and such too. But we never, as that's happening, each period, like from the 1920s was a huge, there was a huge feminist movement in Japan. And not even touching on what was happening historically then, and then keep telling the tale of Butterfly. That's kind of where my uncomfortability with the piece or sense of being unseen as an artist comes. So that's where I was hoping to suggest more positive and productive conversation. I'm gonna sort of skip this one. And I think that's this idea of the reclaiming is something that I have a hard time and then this is where I think all artists are different ways. I have seen actually a lot of the sort of way people are trying to reclaim, but it's for me in this particular production, the way I am actually communicating is that I don't know. For example, if somebody based sort of fashion inspired by kimono, and then that's not kimono, but it's a fashion statement. I don't know whether I will go in and say that I need to reclaim this. So that's kind of where I am actually saying that in my production, I am not trying to retroactively say that this is Japanese. I don't have a way to necessarily, so there's a sort of premise in this production in a sense of budgetary sort of rehearsal time reasons. I'm not allowed to change the score or rearrange so much. And then this comes with actually that's a typical conversation that we are given, artists are given. Oh, no, you have actually a fully time to workshop this and such. But oftentimes opera rehearsals are not so long. So depending on the budget, depending on the schedule of the company, they usually come with sort of scope that's presented to us in a sense of, okay, this production. So in my situation, I was not able to actually change the score or fully rearrange the libretto. So that's where because I'm not changing how Chojo-san is surrounded by unsupportive, undesirable Japanese men, and then trapped in a house. That's not an imagery of I think Japan. And I wanted that authenticity to come from examination of sort of active examination of, should we as a community move forward by keep doing Madame Butterfly, or how can we invest in a better representation? So that's was kind of the overview of my production. And I have a stylized makeup sort of inspired by Japanese, but not really Japanese for the look. I had sort of that doll that I sketched as a first inspiration. But now I am actually working with a puppeteer, Hua Hua Zhang, who's actually local at Philadelphia, to actually create this puppet. This is a very rough stage. She's a very passionate person. She just makes this in like just a couple of days to mock up and everything. But I am actually working with her to sort of show this exotic, tragic heroine. Yeah. So that's sort of my was my presentation. I have a couple of projection images, but I wouldn't necessarily go into this. So that was the presentation that I gave. And then again, sort of for those who don't know the story of the Madame Butterfly, maybe I should have started with this. But you know, there's a sensitive way to actually communicate this, but actually I thought sharing this synopsis that's written by Robert Greenberg, he's a historian, pianist, and then also a composer. I just happened to find this on I just happened to find this online, how he describes the synopsis of Butterfly, and then I'm quoting him right now, is Madame Butterfly is a unabashed tearjerker. It's about a 15-year-old Japanese geisha named Chojo-san, who is purchased, sweet-talked, and then knocked up by American naval officers named B.F. Pinkerton. In the end, after promising her the moon and Mars, Pinkerton abandons Chojo-san only to return 3 years later with his quote unquote proper American wife, which that's actually what's in the libretto. A white chick named Kate. Pinkerton and Kate takes Pinkerton and Chocho's now 3-year-old son from Chocho-san and return to America. The opera concludes with the brutalized and distraught Chocho-san committing seppuku, committing suicide. So that that is a little bit harsher way of describing the synopsis, but again, that's also the point as well, is that when it's a story about 15-year-old girl being taken advantage of and then committing suicide because she doesn't feel like she can't live honorably. That is, I don't know whether you want to show that to inspire like sort of kids or young artists even. And so that's kind of where uh my sort of hesitancy is coming from. And then actually this Robert Greenberg, he continues that, he continues saying that she is a stereotypical Asian female adolescent as perceived by Westerners in the late 19th century. A small, docile sex object who is desperate to please. Of course, that makes me uncomfortable. I think uh, uh, going back to Helen and Alice's presentation, and how sort of they asked the chat GPT to ask what words is associated with Asian people. It's hard to see. And I think kind of going back to and then Kevin, this is actually a conversation too with you too. I think the question that you were about to ask during that meeting was like, and then how does that actually when you are playing that role, does that affect you? Like to summarize, like I think that's kind of and then I think the answer is it does. When you're playing a role that is, and then I'm not saying all show needs to be sort of positive like representation. I think you can have a character that goes a challenging difficulty and then actually not make it in a sense of not but it's difficult for me that, for example, my show is the opening the same day as San Diego Opera's production is. And then like within the within this month, how many Butterfly opened? I think I'm saying this also because of because of scarcity in representation. If they were a lot more diverse in the film world, I think we're becoming finally more diverse when it comes to Asian representation. But and then this is a big ask, and then this is kind of, you know, if when I say this, people are like, oh, you don't know, like you don't have you can't say this, you can't say this because you don't have any idea how to operate an opera company. But I wish actually Madame Butterfly was done more in the community or like educational situation where that was the past. And then if the main stage show was more current representation, so that the main stage show consists of representation that we are proud of. So that is a big wish. Now I know the difficulty with the canonical work. I mean, you know the role of Butterfly going in. It takes more time, investment financially to invest in new work. A standard rep, of course, repeating that is easy, but at the same time, I think I think if as an industry, if we are playing the catch-up game, I don't know how to inspire or bring in more people. I think if the industry has more of the leading part in the community in terms of sort of idea, concept, and an essentially invitation, right? I think that could be sort of healthy, better for all of us. So yeah. So that's sort of my that was my overall questions, thoughts.
Yuki, I believe that Kevin has a question for you to start it all off. I believe. Kevin, am I correct about that?
Yeah, no, I'll
Okay.
be so yeah, we're gonna move on to that was an amazing presentation by Yuki, which was there was a lot to talk about. There was a lot to talk about. And it was fascinating to hear her perspective on butterfly and how she sees it and how her design and her desire to sort of present it in a certain way is reflective of her own view on it. And as I said, we're going to open up the floor to questions. So if you have a question, please start putting it in the Q&A chat. There was a lot of stuff there. There's a lot of information there. So please give us a question so we can unpack some of this stuff and really talk about it more. As I said, I had lots of questions as I went through it. But I guess one of my questions is, I mean, we talked about um, that you don't see Butterfly as sort of a Japanese character. You don't see it as a Japanese opera, that it doesn't connect with you in that way. What is your image of being Japanese, and what image of Japan would you like to represent? Because that can be lots of different stuff, you know. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so I think when I feel sort of, wait, what's going on with Butterfly is actually she's just staying poor and then still just waiting and then doing nothing while she's waiting for Pinkerton. Yeah, she is raising a child, but also I've known a lot of mothers uh who were in a sort of situation where they have to raise like single-handedly have to raise a child, and then her existence doesn't consist of just waiting for the husband. I think that's kind of where I wish she believed more in herself rather than him, rather than Pinkerton. And yes, she's a teenager, but also because she's a teenager, she's like I think Japan, like it's when you see actually girls that same age as Butterfly on the street, like even, right, I know time is different, right, and then circumstances are different. However, it's filled with passion, like they are filled with passion and things they want to do. And I think actually Cho-Cho-san also started that way, right? She wanted to come to the United States. I don't think the objective was necessarily the boy or the man. Um, if so, I think she would have done something. And then also portrayal of geisha, I think is problematic in two ways in this situation. Is that this sort of portrayal of geisha is equalizing geisha as sex workers. And then problem number one is that you shouldn't be shaming or though saying that that's dishonorable or anything like that. That's problem number one for me. Number two is that actually that's a wrong job description. there are still girls who want to be geisha because they love the tradition. It's the objective of being geisha is not to sort of be with the man. It's like that's but that's what Chocho-san describes in her aria. She didn't want to be seen with other men, like, and that makes her feel this like sort of not live in honor. So I in general had I did martial arts, I did kendo. So my mentor taught me a lot about honor to Japanese. It's a female team, like, I mean, it's a sports, so and in that situation, I don't know, my idea of honor was different than and then yeah, teenager butterfly. So that's kind of where I don't see necessarily so much of a Japanese-ness. I think I mean, like, not to now that I'm like not I don't want to now stereotype Asian woman, but yeah, waiting around yeah, waiting around for a man doesn't seem like what we do. So yeah.
Wonderful. Again, if you have a question for Yuki, please put it in the chat. I guess I'll just continue because we don't have a question yet. So
Kevin, I
will
have
just kind of
something.
continue with a little bit of one-on-one Q&A. Sure, go ahead.
Kevin, I have something only because I'm having a little trouble with the Q&A box. Typically, there's an area in which you type the question, and I'm not able to do it. So I'm wondering if anybody else is having an issue, and if so, we can switch it over to this chat box. But while we wait, I would have a question for Yuki. So I was an understudy of Jun Kaneko's Butterfly in San Francisco. And I ended up doing a lot of the stagings because the woman who was doing the lead was also doing another show at the same time. So we had to sort of fill that in. And I was happy for the availability to be on stage and do it. But I wondered, I didn't wonder then. I didn't think a thing of it. But now I wonder, is if some of what you were feeling when you looked at it and said, I don't know that this is Japanese. I feel that this is remote to me. I see the hills, but I don't see anything else that tells me, I don't know if this is valid, but it was directed by someone other than June. It was partially, and it was his ideas, obviously. He gave his ideas to the woman who did it, but it was also choreographed by someone other than June. And both of these women were white women. So I wonder, I know that one studied with him intensely on his concept.
Yeah.
But did you feel when you were looking at it, I don't know if that was the case on the show that you saw, but do you think that that would have something to do with you feeling not as connected to it?
I have actually, being completely honest, I have a mixed feeling about that, in a sense. I'm not a strict gatekeeper of it must, like, so a couple of things. Of course, when I see non-Japanese person performing, so my first reaction, so when Memories of Geisha came out, I was in Japan. And then I didn't know anything about it except for I saw like a trailer or ad of the show, and then I was like, oh, why is this Chinese person like playing a Japanese person? I didn't know, I grew up in a homogenous country, so I didn't know so much of representation or color appropriate casting at all. I didn't even think about it, but that was my first reaction. Um, and I think people definitely um uh subconsciously actually do feel that, oh, well, she's not, like, if you are the race, and then if like somebody who's not the race is doing, um whether you feel that, yes, I think. um how, like, and then when it comes to right or wrong, that's when the discussion becomes complicated. For example, I know many people who's not Japanese that knows Japanese movement better than me. um and then the conversation of representation, right, I think goes sort of different ways. For example, preferably casting a non-Asian person over Asian person, because the reason is, well, we couldn't find an Asian person who can sing as well or who can design as well and such. I think that's uh questionable. I'm like, do you actually looked, or did you just look at people who you know? Um, Especially even in the local situation, right? Like, uh, and then, um, and then if you were to a person who got the gig situation, first of all, it is a gig. And then, um, uh, and then obviously I do shows that's non-Japanese, right? But I do my research, I do my homework, and then I don't well, yes, I do comment on sort of um problematic thing of Mozart or even Puccini's, like yes, I do comment on problematic, but if I were mocking someone, I think that's where I don't think you like that's how when I feel I think Chocho-san is loved so much by a lot of people. But I don't know whether she's cared. Um, and then I think as long as she is actually cared, right? And then this is where um intent versus impact um uh becomes a conversation. Like, yeah, I think so in many ways, it's hard for me to say like whether that was a factor of it, because actually Leslie is her name, the director. I did feel like she knows more about Japanese um movement than me. And then honestly speaking, I know a lot of people who knows about Japanese kimono more than me. Yes, my mother worked at the kimono shop, but that's the extent. Like, I know I wore hakama for when I practiced kendo, but I don't know how to make it. I know a lot of people who can make them. So in that sense, it is I don't know, it's like I think it's a lot more, it's not a rule that's like um of, okay, like if you are like this race, you can only do this. I don't think that's the conversation. So in terms of that, I think I had a lot with Jun Kaneko's butterfly, I had a lot more to actually so because that was the first time me seeing butterfly, meaning to say that that's the first time me hearing Pinkerton like say or sing, right? Like I'm gonna have a proper wife, like for example. Um that was a little bit, I have to be honest, like my eyes got just wider and wider that like at during that point. So anyways, so yeah, I think in terms of like sort of sensibility, like again, like my particular perspective and then concept of Madame Butterfly, I don't know who else, like, who grew up in different culture have come up with it. So I think in that sense, right, that diversity do matter, whether it's coming from Asian woman, Asian male, like for me, or even oh, any other race. I think depending on, like, yes, what your cultural identity is, like, has a lot to do with what you can bring in. And then that's kind of where I think then it's about how do you want to deal with the production? Yeah. So
Yes, that
yeah,
reminds me a lot of Phil S.
Mhm.
Chan's book when he says, you know, he's going to Nutcracker like anybody else, and his just keeps his eyes just keep widening because he realizes the misrepresentation that's happening is harmful. So I hear what you're saying. A question has come in, but I believe it's more. I think she said that it's a more of a comment. Kevin, did you see that?
Sure.
Um, I need to.
Sure. Yeah, so we have a question from Linda H. Really, it's more of a comment. Back in the 80s, I took my Japanese host college student, to a performance in a small college town. I assume with Madame Butterfly. Her reaction, this is actually a bit funny. It's a story written by an Italian man, sung in Italian, acted sung by two tall white Americans with two big noses, wearing obi too high. My father told me when I returned home he does not want to see a blue-eyed blonde grandchild. She actually loved the performance. She married a fellow student, American, has two girls who carry her surname rather than the father's. She's a professor in Japan and a very strong feminist. Um, somebody who's Japanese who sees the American almost sees it as a comedy, uh, sees it as um, sees it as caricature. Really does see it as caricature. Um,
yeah,
and took well, I will say that just one detail. If you're an American and you marry a Japanese woman and you want citizenship, you have to take her name. So that's that's one of the sort of quirks of Japanese immigration. You have to have a Japanese name if you'd like to live in Japan. So
yeah.
if you're an American and want to marry a Japanese woman, live in Japan, get ready to change your last name. So so weird quirk of feminism and Japanese immigration policy. Um, should we not consider that the opera was written in 1904 from Finding Russell? I guess this is the issue of time. If we
Yeah.
are talking about an opera that is set in 1904, is it appropriate to maybe sort of impose upon it a modern perspective, especially if the purpose of it maybe is to inspire for you, to inspire other people?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's definitely like time is a thing. And then like, like people ask me, well,
So
didn't it
Yuki,
actually
do you have any comment? Yeah.
oh sorry. Yeah, so people like actually ask me like, oh, didn't it so that means that it actually like didn't it actually happen? And then it's kind of for me, that's not the point. Um when it comes to well, didn't it actually happen or like wasn't like it might have and then like Masaki Kusama is the actress name. He actually came out with a documentary like last summer, how his mother sort of uh had him. He's a half Japanese, half American. How she had him during the Korean War because during Korean War, American soldiers stayed in Japan, and uh, they had him. He went back to America, never came back. He married a quote unquote proper wife, um, and he was very like so yes that story has happened not even in 1904 but um I think my point is that um should that be the main representation for Asian or in the Asian Americans? And then by saying that, also I'm gonna clarify this. I'm not necessarily saying cancel the show. I'm not canceling Madame Butterfly. The I I will be totally okay if this show is done every once in a while. But for example, if you do imagine that for some people, this is mainly the role that they are being asked to do. And I don't know, I got offered at least like 4 sort of butterflies in the past. Well, some of them just didn't happen because of pandemic, but like if uh, that's kind of where that diversity, and then when I say diversity, I mean more so in diverse in concept. That's what I'm asking for to the industry. So yeah.
Wonderful. Yeah, I think there's an important point to state that we're talking about one of the only depictions of Japanese culture that's in this space. And if this is one of the only ones, that's the problem. If it's part of a diversity of different representations, then there's less of a problem. If there's one, then that's a problem.
Right.
Another question. Yuki, I agree. Proper wife is disgusting. As an American, I find Pinkerton disgusting. And I don't see Cho-Cho as weak, but a woman in old days who did what she needed to do what she could. So she has a little bit of a different perspective possibly on Cho-Cho-san as not being sort of a weak woman, but somebody who is sort of operating within a society where her options maybe are limited and she's doing what she can to survive, essentially.
Yeah.
So how do you respond to that question?
Um, like I do again sort of see understand in a sense of I think it's always a difficult decision to choose death. Again, I mean Japan still is to this day has highest suicide rate for high school kids. When that's also what is going on, and then if like I don't know whether that's where we want to highlight in a way. I have a little bit of a trouble celebrating that, I have to be honest. I'm not necessarily saying she did something wrong. I'm actually questioning about our action. I understand if it's more sympathetic. I question culturally, I think personally, feeling, wow, she did what she can, even I think that's different than, again, that's where, the personal versus how I would like the culture to move forward is also not as simple as is like, well, wasn't it Church-san weak? Like, is Church-san weak or strong? Like, yes, in a way she's strong. Like I do. Like, it takes guts to kill yourself. Like, especially the way she did, seppuku. Not disagreeing there. It's for me is should we show that as a strong, like, look, she's a strong icon, like to kids, for example. I mean, it's not a kids appropriate opera anyways, but yeah, even for us.
And so the same woman asked another question. Sadly, teenage girls, I mean, we sort of touched on it, but sadly, teenage girls today commit suicide due to peer pressure. This could be a teachable moment for the young. perhaps news stories written by Japanese women to right the wrongs or reflect today's women. And I think that's a lot of what you're suggesting here,
Yeah,
Yuki.
yeah. Oh, I think now I see the
Yeah, we have a
question.
couple of more questions. Yuki, I have a question! Exclamation mark. Uh, I want to hear about your opinion about seppuku instead of kubikiri when butterfly suicide. Many opera I see they do seppuku.
Um, I think that's like sort of what's hinted is seppuku because of how that's how samurai normally die as the method of honorable death. Um I mean, I think uh couple of detail is that there's always a person who will help you guide seppuku so that you don't die. The point is not to die in agony, die in honor, um, like and such. Uh, but yeah, I think that's the intent, which I understand the intent of the whole seppuku, yeah, and such. Like, I mean, kubikiri too is like difficult. I think no matter what the situation is, like the um trying to die in honor, um of course that's a difficult decision to make, no matter who you are, what you are. I just, yeah, that's kind of where um yeah, I understand more like to answer the question, just the question. I think I understand in general like seppuku harakiri more because like even in the 50s where Mishima killed himself that way, right? So that was the method of the honorable death. So um
Yeah, the Noriko Zaragoza, who just asked the question, she is the cultural consultant for this office. And
uh,
as somebody who's also worked as a cultural consultant, I've had the conversation of that's not how men commit suicide. This is how women commit suicide, and here are the options. I have had
yeah.
that conversation many times. And how do you do it? And this is how you do it. Um, and which is always a fun conversation. Uh, and so another question, Vanya Russell, the opera is fiction. It is not a documentary. Should we nowadays change it? So the opera is fiction.
I
I
hope
guess the thing is I don't know what way this person is asking how to change it, but maybe you can sort of go over the ways in which you'd like to change it.
yeah,
Or
I mean
what could
like
be changed? What do you think
yeah.
could be changed about it? If you had all the time and the resources in the world to do a production of Madame Butterfly.
Like for me, I totally agree with the statement. It's a fiction, not a documentary. Like this is where like part of the thing that actually pigeonhole me whole like puts me into the pigeonhole even as like I'm not a singer, but even as an Asian artist is that like as if I have to either verify like existence of some type of Madam Butterfly-esque personnel or behavior of like Madam Butterfly. And then yes, it's a fiction. Actually by sort of off like weird tangent, but like I was just looking for a public domain footage of past productions of Madame Butterfly, and then one of the first things that came up was French porn that was like um uh uh yeah, about sort of based on Madame Butterfly thing. What I didn't mind actually about that version was that surprisingly I actually didn't mind about that one. Um because they were not trying to be Japanese at all. They were like themed as Japanese. They were totally about theming, Japanese theme. They were aware of it. They were not trying to pretend to be Japanese. And then, sort of essentially it was sort of just being porn. And then it didn't actually, not to go too much in detail. Sorry, I didn't mean to go inappropriate this way. Sort of, and then I actually looked it up. It's actually, I guess, one of the first openly open film that shows homosexuality. Yes, there's a lesbian scene between Chocho-san and Suzuki, and then actually Chocho-san looked empowered of making the decision. So I was actually totally and then like it was not a tragic, like sort of not to like sort of pun on the porn part, but it was not like sympathy porn, if that makes sense. Like, oh, this poor person, this poor girl. It wasn't like which makes actually us as Japanese community, or I've watched people who say that, and it makes me feel small. So because it was in that way, actually, I didn't mind that iteration of quote unquote Madame Butterfly. So the long answer is short, and then I didn't mean to go that kind of a tangent way, but I think yes, we should change it, and then I think it can be totally empowering story. I mean, like this Chocho-san never got to explore even the idea of a love besides Pinkerton, versus this French film, French porn actually was like she was actually exploring and then actually living. So like I think actually that's even a better iteration of Madame Butterfly. So
I think too, it seems, Yuki, that when we're doing a piece, whether it's old,
I didn't think
whether
we talked about
it's
French porn.
yes, I think Kevin's also on a major delay, so we have to like it's okay. I think when it comes down to it,
Sorry
sometimes
about that.
oh, it's okay. The question of when it was written or whether it's a fiction or what it's all understandable. Yes, of course, it was written a long time ago by a white man
yeah.
who had a very different idea of what women are and what it. Great. At the same time, right now, with AAPI crimes up 300%, we have to make sure that we're doing the least amount of harm. And caricature is harm.
Yeah,
So no matter when it was written,
yeah,
we still can't do active harm. That's, for me, bottom line.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. That is totally my bottom line. Yeah, I think it is connected. And then this is where I think the representation, intention, and then effect. When you design a character, there's an intention. Like whether you like it or not. Like, well, let's say that you didn't have an intention, but you have impact. So that's where I think where I think as an artist, like I mean I am privileged, right? Like being given this chance to, or like people actually paying me to um visualize and then sort of present my voice. That's a privilege. I think when that situation is handed in, whether it's a job or anything, yes, it is sometimes day to day. I mean, this is how I pay my rent. So yes, it's a privilege, but it's a job. But at the same time, it is impact is part of I think part of my responsibility as an artist, our responsibility.
I apologize for the delay on my end. I didn't know that it was that bad. I apologize. I
All
will
good, all
try to get
good.
a hard line for next week. We have maybe one more question from John Gabriel. Thank you for your presentation. Do you have any advice for those who are interested in learning about Japanese culture by experiencing Japanese art? How would learning more about Japanese culture and Japanese art impact an opera aficionado's Madame Butterfly experience? Also, I just think also maybe talk a little bit about how what inspiration do you draw from possibly traditional Japanese art and in your own designs as well? I'd love to hear that as well.
Sort of go like so I just moved to Oakland, California. I was in LA. While I was in LA, they were actually sort of well, San Francisco also has a lot of sort of large Asian community. So while I was in LA, East West Player has been like the place where it was home for a lot of Asian artists. San Francisco in general has a lot of Japanese and Asian community as well. I think the where I drive my draw art from is actually a lot of my, I'm fortunate to say that it's a lot of it is from my colleagues. I mean, during pandemic, actually, I had a project with like Alice. It was like a small thing, for example, but I got genuinely inspired by her energy. Like she was just acting in the hallway, but like she did it so good and so passionately, and then she was so 100% in. So that actually inspired me to do be even more creative, because looking how creative she was in her expression. In terms of the artist, I like throughout the project I have been fortunate to meet a lot of Asian artists. So conversation with them is a lot how I get inspired. I think the point I'm making here is that right now it's at the stage, for me at least, it's more in the conversation rather than the result. I think when I see the result, like I see a lot of the attempt, and then I see great uh inspiration, and then I draw that from them. But at the same time, I think currently the most valuable thing for me is the conversation. So I think for all you tuning in this conversation, this kind of a conversation, I think that's this kind of a thing is definitely how I think we can sort of learn more so. When you just see the outcome, I think again, there's that intent impact part might not fully be aligned. So I think like for example, my butterfly, I hope it lands right, because I don't know yet, because I haven't executed yet. I'm working with a wonderful director, Ethan Hurd, who also has done done the butterfly, and then like I actually liked what he did in his butterfly, so I'm actually asking him to actually asked him to work with me like on this. So I think the horizontal connection, and then that, which is the reason why I wanted to comment on Alice and Helen's sort of panel as well. that horizontal communication, conversation, dialogue is, I think, how we can learn from each other. I think you're muted, Kevin.
Yeah,
Oh,
I
yeah.
think we are officially
muted
out of
Kevin.
questions. We have run through all of them.
Also, we have one
Can you
here.
hear me?
Yeah, Kevin, can you hear
I
me?
don't think I'm muted.
Oh, no, you're good, you're good, yeah.
Kevin, can you hear me okay? Do you mind if I read something live from our general director? He has put in a comment here, and it just kind of disappeared. He says, just a comment, Yuki is very thoughtful, beautiful artist. If any of you saw her Tragedy of Carmen with us, you will remember
David.
that. Yeah, David's on. I'm grateful for her very personal observations, thinking of how and why we produce Butterfly is very complicated. And asking questions is important for us as opera producers and our audiences. Absolutely. Thank you, David. Yeah, we have to ask the questions. We have to at least open the dialogue. When I was talking initially to Yuki, I think I remember saying to you, there's an elephant in the room. How do we put lipstick on it, or do we pretend it isn't there? We have to we have to talk. We have to say that's an elephant. That elephant is gray. Here's what's happening, but really, really appreciate. I did not get to see the Tragedy of Carmen, much to my chagrin, but is there anybody else? I'm looking in the Q&A. It looks like, we have from some of the participants, thanks so much for the conversation.
Thank you.
And the presentation. Yes. Does anybody else have any burning questions before we're almost at time? And I want to leave time open for those. But yeah, I've noticed a bit of a dwindling, and I wondered if it may be time to wrap up. Yuki, thank you so much. Unless we get another question in the next couple of minutes, is there anything else that you'd like to leave us with about either your production or what's happening in Philadelphia? We're so proud.
Yeah, while we talked about this, thank you, like actually sending off from my first experience right out of school. Yeah, it was everybody was like we will write you recommendation, just tell us what you need. Yeah, no, John Peter is not there anymore, but like also I believe Ron also retired too. Like the people I worked while I was there right away, they were very much supportive of what I did. Also, Alan Hicks, thank you, shout out. I know that yeah, connected. Yeah. So yeah.
I think he was actually going to try to join one of these. I told him about our connection due to him, and also Dr. Teksu Kim, who will be joining us at the end of the entire series on April 18th. This is also a recommend from Alan. So if he's here, I didn't look. Thank you, Alan. And I've already thanked him anyway, but what a great guy.
Yeah.
Kevin, thank you so much for today and for fielding and I am so impressed always with how you keep a fluidity with what we're asking and what we're feeling, and help us to feel comfortable to say what we need to say and ask what we need to ask. So thank you. And all of you, we will see you. Thank you very much, Dr. Teksu Kim.
Hopefully this isn't too delayed, but thank you as well.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
And we'll see you all next week. We will send out all those reminders, and we can't wait to see you all again. Thank you, Yuki.
Thank you.
All right, goodbye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye, Kevin.